Previously, we saw how a marriage contract united Luna and Caroline in a dangerous game of appearances. After a real and overwhelming kiss in the kitchen, Caroline retreated, erecting walls of ice between them. But on that stormy night, fate decided to intervene and change the course of our lives. The wind howled outside like a hungry beast, scratching the double-paned glass windows of the penthouse, and the rain fell with a violence that turned the city view into a gray, indistinct blur. It was already past midnight and Caroline still hadn't arrived, which wasn't uncommon in our routine of strangers sharing the same roof. But that night, an inexplicable anguish tightened my chest, preventing me from sleeping. I walked through the dark living room, with only the light of lightning illuminating the environment from time to time, when I heard the noise of the electronic key in the door, followed by a dull thud of something heavy falling on the floor. I ran to the entrance hall and found Caroline leaning against the wall, soaked from head to toe, her leather briefcase thrown on the rug and her face paler than the white marble of the floor. "Caroline," I called, running to her before she slid to the ground, and when I touched her arm, the heat emanating from her burned my hand, a frightening contrast to her cold, wet clothes. She tried to push me away, a conditioned reflex of her ferocious independence, murmuring that she was fine, that it was just a cold. But her legs gave way, and I had to hold her tight, feeling the dead weight of her body against mine. "I don't need help," she whispered, her voice weak and delirious, her glazed eyes trying to focus on my face without success. "You need a doctor. That's what you need," I replied, ignoring her order and putting her arm around my neck to take her to the bedroom. The journey to the master suite, that forbidden territory where I had never stepped, seemed interminable, with Caroline tripping over her own feet and shivering violently from cold and fever. When I finally opened her bedroom door, I was hit by a smell of loneliness and lavender. The room was immense, impersonal, and cold, just as she tried to be, with a perfectly made bed that seemed never to have been used for sleeping, only for resting. I laid her on the silk bedspread and began taking off her shoes, her feet cold as ice blocks, while she curled up in a fetal position, hugging her own body in a useless attempt to warm up. "I need to take off these wet clothes, Caroline, or you will get worse," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my heart racing with concern. She didn't protest this time, just moaned something unintelligible, and I started unbuttoning her dress shirt with trembling fingers, trying to be professional, trying not to look at her exposed skin. But it was impossible to ignore the forced intimacy of that moment. I undressed the most powerful woman I knew, seeing her reduced to a fragile and human figure, and put a dry cotton t-shirt I found in the drawer on her, covering her with the thickest duvet I found in the closet. I ran to the kitchen to get water, medicine, and wet towels, acting on the autopilot of someone who cared for a sick mother for years. And when I returned, Caroline was thrashing in the bed, trapped in some feverish nightmare. I sat on the edge of the mattress and placed the cold compress on her forehead, and she sighed, tilting her head toward my touch, like a plant seeking the sun. The Iron Lady had melted, and what remained was just Caroline, a frightened woman burning with fever. I stayed there for hours, changing the towels, forcing her to drink small sips of water, listening to the storm roar outside, while the silence between us was filled only by her difficult breathing. At one moment, in the height of the early morning, she opened her eyes, feverish and bright, and held my wrist with surprising strength, her fingers squeezing my skin as if I were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "Don't go away," she asked, her voice choked with tears. And it wasn't an order from the boss. It was a plea from someone who spent their entire life being strong and was now exhausted. "Everyone leaves in the end, Luna. Please don't leave me alone here." That confession broke my heart into 1,000 pieces, revealing the deep wound she hid under expensive suits and armored contracts. "I'm not going anywhere, Carol," I promised, using the nickname she only allowed in front of others, but which now seemed the only way to access her truth. I interlaced my fingers with hers, stroking the back of her hand with my thumb, and she closed her eyes again, a solitary tear running down her temple and disappearing into the pillow. I stayed watching over her sleep, observing the lines of tension in her face soften little by little, and realized that night had changed everything. The contract said there would be no intimacy, but there was nothing more intimate than caring for someone who couldn't defend themselves, and I knew that when the sun rose, neither of us would be able to return to the hiding place of before. I woke up with a sore neck, and the gray clarity of the morning invading the room through the heavy curtains, realizing I had fallen asleep in the armchair next to Caroline's bed. The silence in the apartment was absolute, different from the oppressive silence of before. Now it seemed like a silence of peace, as if the storm of the previous night had washed not only the streets of Seattle, but also the tension hovering between us. I looked at the bed and saw Caroline still sleeping, her pale face sunk into the white pillows, without the armor of makeup and without the severe executive expression, looking incredibly young and defenseless. I stretched my body, feeling every muscle protest from the poorly slept night, and approached to touch her forehead, noting with relief that the fever had subsided, leaving only fresh skin slightly damp with sweat. When I withdrew my hand, her eyes opened slowly, focusing on the unfamiliar ceiling for a second before turning to me, loaded with a sleepy confusion that soon turned into shame. She sat up in bed in a sudden movement, pulling the duvet up to her neck as if she wanted to hide her emotional nakedness. And I saw the Iron Lady's mask attempt to return to place, but she was too weak to sustain it. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice hoarse and failing, avoiding my gaze. "I don't usually get sick, let alone give work to others. You shouldn't have stayed here all night, Luna. This isn't part of your contractual obligations." I sighed, feeling a pang of irritation and affection, and shook my head. "Stop it, Carol," I said, using the nickname again as a weapon to disarm her. "You were delirious with fever, shaking with cold. Did you really think I was going to leave you alone and go sleep in my guest room?" I went to the kitchen to prepare strong coffee and toast, hearing the shower turn on in her suite. And when I returned with the tray, she had already showered, wearing a dark blue silk robe and sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the rain that continued to fall outside, turning the ocean into a gray and churning mass. I placed the tray on her lap, and she looked at me with a shy gratitude that made my heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the cup with both hands, and we stayed there in silence for a long time, just listening to the sound of the rain and the clinking of the spoon on the porcelain. There was no schedule for today. The world outside was too chaotic, and the office seemed a distant reality. It was she who broke the silence, without facing me, speaking to the window. "My father always said that sickness is a sign of weakness, that a leader cannot afford the luxury of stopping. So I learned to ignore my body until it collapsed, like what happened yesterday." I sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for her to feel my presence. "No one can be strong all the time, Caroline. Not even you," I replied softly. "And you don't need to prove anything to me. I saw who you are when the lights go out and the audience leaves, and honestly, I like that woman much more than the untouchable CEO." She turned her face to me, surprised by my confession, and I saw her barriers crumble a little more. "It is exhausting, Luna," she confessed, letting her shoulders drop. "Pretending I have no fear, that I don't feel loneliness. that this giant apartment isn't a marble tomb. Sometimes I feel like I am a fraud, and everyone is just waiting for the moment I will fail. I reached out and touched her knee over the duvet, a light touch that had no sexual connotation, just human support. You are not a fraud. You are the most impressive woman I have ever met. But you built walls so high you forgot to put a door to get out, I said. She placed her hand over mine, squeezing lightly, and that simple contact was more intense than any technical kiss we had ever exchanged. We spent the rest of the day there, stranded in that bubble of intimacy created by the rain, talking about banal things, about books, about her childhood full of rules, and mine full of freedom and lack of money, discovering that, beneath the social differences, we had the same scars. For the first time in months, there was no tension, no fear of what would come next. We ate sandwiches in bed, laughing at silly things, and I saw Caroline smile for real, a smile that reached her eyes and illuminated her face, rejuvenating her 10 years. I knew the truce was temporary, that the sun would shine again, and the demands of the real world would knock on the door. But on that gray and rainy day, I allowed myself to believe we could be just two women who liked each other, without contracts, without money, and without a past. When night fell again, and the rain finally stopped, Caroline looked at me with a different intensity, no longer of desperate desire or coldness, but of a deep affection that frightened me, because I knew that feeling was much more dangerous to our agreement than any physical attraction. Night fell over Seattle, bringing a dense and complicit silence, different from any other that had ever inhabited that penthouse. The city lights began to turn on down below, reflecting on the wet glass of the balcony like distant stars. But inside the room, the only lighting came from the bedside lamp, casting golden shadows on Caroline's pale skin. She no longer had a fever, but she remained there, sitting on the bed, observing me with an intensity that made the air seem heavy and electric. I got up to collect the dinner tray, ready to return to my role as caregiver or employee, but her hand held my wrist, a firm and warm touch that sent a clear message. The truce was over, and something new was beginning. "Don't go," she asked, her voice hoarse no longer from sickness, but from a raw emotion she stopped trying to hide. I looked at her, seeing the powerful woman stripped of all her armor, wearing only that silk robe that seemed to slide off her shoulders, revealing the curve of her neck and the vulnerability she kept under lock and key. I left the tray aside and sat on the edge of the bed again, feeling my heart beat against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What are we doing, Carol?" I asked in a whisper, afraid to break the spell, afraid she would cite some clause of the contract or retreat as she did in the kitchen. She didn't answer with words. Caroline leaned in slowly and touched my face with both hands, her fingers tracing the contour of my jaw, my lips, as if memorizing every detail, as if I were the most valuable work of art she had ever seen. "Forget the contract," she murmured against my mouth, her warm breath mixing with mine. "Forget the money, the company, my crazy family. Tonight, Luna, I want it to be just you and me, without rules, without lies." And before I could agree, before I could say I had waited for this since the moment I saw her at the supermarket, she kissed me. It wasn't a technical kiss for an audience, nor a desperate and furious kiss like the one in the kitchen. It was a kiss of surrender, slow, deep, and devastatingly sweet. I felt her taste, the taste of coffee and repressed desire, and let myself sink into that sensation, responding with a hunger that came from the soul. My hands found their way to the nape of her neck, tangling in her soft hair, and I pulled her closer, wanting to eliminate any physical distance that still existed between us. The world outside disappeared completely. There were no more debts, No more social differences. Just two women who had found shelter in each other. She pulled me onto the bed, and the duvet became our private universe. When she undid the knot of my robe, her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from a reverence that made me feel like the most loved woman in the world. I, who was always invisible, who was always the checkout girl or the poor intern, felt adored under her touch. Caroline kissed every inch of exposed skin, murmuring compliments I never thought I would hear, saying how much she wanted me, how beautiful I was, how much my presence had brought light to that dark house. The intimacy between us flowed like a high tide, natural and inevitable. There was no rush. We explored each other's bodies with the patience of those who have their whole lives ahead, discovering maps of sensitivity, old scars, and points of pleasure. Her smell, of lavender and clean skin, impregnated my senses, and every touch of hers seemed to light a bonfire under my skin. When we finally united, skin against skin, without barriers, it was a silent explosion of feelings, a perfect fit that went far beyond the physical. I looked into her eyes and saw my own soul reflected there, saw the fear of loving dissipate and give way to absolute trust. In that immense bed, under sheets of Egyptian thread, we made love with brutal honesty. There was no theater, there was no performance, there was weeping contained from emotion. There were sighs that were confessions of love. There was the interlacing of legs and fingers in a blind knot no one could untie. Caroline, the woman who commanded empires of concrete, came undone in my arms, whispering my name like a prayer, and I held her, being her foundation, the strength she needed to be weak. In that moment, I knew it didn't matter what the contract said. I was already hers, completely and irrevocably. Afterward, we lay in silence, embraced, breathing returning to normal rhythm in unison. Her head rested on my chest, and I caressed her arm, feeling the soft skin under my fingers. The rain had stopped outside, and the full moon illuminated the room with a silver light, drawing soft shadows on the walls. I had never felt so complete, so at peace. Caroline lifted her face and looked at me, eyes shining with a new sweetness, and gave me a long peck on the lips. "Thank you," she said, and I knew she wasn't thanking me for the pleasure, but for seeing her, for making her feel alive again. We fell asleep like that, intertwined, not knowing that would be the last night of peace before the real world came to collect the price of our happiness. I woke up groping the empty side of the bed, still with a silly smile on my lips, seeking the heat of Caroline's body that wasn't there anymore. In her place, I found a note on the firm's letterhead, written in her elegant and angular handwriting. "Had an emergency meeting, didn't want to wake you. Coffee is ready, see you tonight." See, I hugged her pillow, inhaling deeply the smell of lavender and skin that had stayed impregnated in the fabric, feeling a liquid and golden happiness run through my veins. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of the future. I had the woman I loved, I had my debts being paid, and I had the hope that that paper contract had turned into an unbreakable bond. I spent the morning floating through the penthouse, humming while watering the plants on the balcony, feeling that apartment had finally ceased to be a set and turned into a home. But my bubble of happiness burst shortly after noon, with the shrill and insistent ring of the intercom. When I answered, the doorman's voice sounded hesitant, warning that Dr. Arthur, Caroline's uncle and board member, was coming up and that he had the master key, so it was no use saying I wasn't there. My stomach dropped to the floor, and the taste of coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I knew who he was, the man Caroline feared most in the company, the vulture waiting for any slip-up of hers to take the presidency. The front door opened before I could decide whether to run or face the beast, and Arthur entered the apartment as if he owned it, a short and robust man, in an impeccable gray suit and small eyes that swept the room with contempt until they stopped on me. He didn't say good morning, nor did he ask for permission. He just walked to the glass coffee table and threw a heavy brown folder on it, the sound of the impact echoing like a shot in the silence of the room. "Sit down, girl," he ordered, and his voice had the same arrogance as his niece, but without any trace of the humanity I had discovered in her. I remained standing, crossing my arms to hide the tremor in my hands, trying to summon the courage Caroline had lent me the night before. "What do you want here?" I asked, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. Arthur let out a dry, humorless laugh, opening the folder with thick fingers adorned by a gold ring. "What I want is to prevent my niece from dragging our family name through the mud because of an adventurer." He spread the photos on the glass table, and I felt the blood drain from my face. They were photos of me at the supermarket register, photos of the facade of the falling-apart house where I lived, copies of my mother's hospital debts, and, worst of all, the record of my suspended college enrollment for lack of payment. "Did you really think no one would investigate the mysterious fiancé of the future president?" he asked, distilling poison in every syllable. "A supermarket cashier, Luna? Seriously? Caroline has always had peculiar tastes, but hiring a starving girl to pretend to be high society is a new level of desperation, even for her." I felt tears of humiliation prick my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Caroline knows all of this. She accepts me as I am," I lied, trying to protect the little dignity I had left. But he shook his head, with a cruel smile on his lips. "She knows, but the board of directors doesn't know, and the German investors much less so," he retorted, closing the folder with a snap. "If this dossier leaks to the press tomorrow, Caroline's credibility goes down the drain. The firm's shares will plummet, and she will be removed from the presidency for improper conduct and fraud. She will lose the company her father built. She will lose the respect of her peers, and she will be the joke of the city. And the fault, my dear, will be exclusively yours." The weight of those words crushed me. He wasn't threatening me. He was threatening the only thing Caroline loved more than her own life, her legacy. Arthur approached me, invading my personal space, smelling of cigar and cheap lotion. "I have a proposal for you. You are going to pack your bags and vanish from this city today. You will leave a letter saying you got tired, that you want money, that you never loved her. If you do this, I pay double what Caroline promised you in the contract, and guarantee this story dies here. If you stay, I publish this tomorrow morning, and you will watch from the front row the ruin of the woman you claim to love." I looked at the photos on the table, at the concrete proof of my insignificance before the power of that world, and thought of Caroline's smile the night before, of the peace she felt in my arms. If I stayed, I would destroy her. Her love for me would be the weakness the uncle would use to take everything from her. I felt a terrible cold spread through my chest, the cold of resignation. I had promised to take care of her, and in that moment, I realized the only way to care for her, to protect her from that predator, was leaving her life forever, leaving her with a broken heart, but with her career intact. "All right," I whispered, feeling as if I were ripping my own heart out with bare hands. "I will leave, but I don't want your dirty money. I just want you to leave her alone." Arthur smiled, victorious, and gathered the folder. "Wise decision, girl. You have until 6 in the afternoon to disappear." He left the apartment whistling, and I fell to my knees on the plush rug, letting out a silent scream of pain, looking at the clock on the wall and seeing the seconds of my happiness slip away like sand between my fingers. I had a few hours to destroy Caroline's heart to be able to save her. The sound of the zipper on my suitcase closing sounded like the final tear in a canvas. I took a lifetime to paint, a dry and definitive noise in the silence of the guest room. I had spent the last 2 hours methodically erasing any trace of my existence in that apartment, folding the expensive clothes Caroline had bought and leaving them on the bed, aligned like corpses in a morgue. I put on my old jeans and worn t-shirt, feeling the rough fabric scratch my sensitive skin, a physical reminder that I was returning to the place I never should have left. I placed the envelope with the money her uncle had given me on the dresser, untouched, for I preferred to starve than use a cent of that blackmail. But I knew I needed to ask for the contract money from Caroline, to make my lie credible. I sat in the living room armchair, with the suitcase at my feet, and waited. Every minute that passed seemed like an hour, and my heart beat in a painful and irregular rhythm, rehearsing the cruel words I would have to say, words I knew would burn my tongue and destroy the woman I loved. When the elevator finally opened, shortly after 5 in the afternoon, Caroline entered with a radiant smile, carrying a huge bouquet of white lilies and a bag from a famous bakery. She seemed light, rejuvenated, the Iron Lady completely disarmed, and seeing that happiness on her face was like taking a knife to the chest, because I knew I was the assassin about to kill her. "Love, I'm home early," she exclaimed, dropping things on the sofa and coming toward me with open arms, ready to kiss me. I took a step back, dodging her touch as if she were fire, and her smile faltered, confusion clouding her brown eyes. "What is it, Luna? Did something happen?" She looked at the suitcase on the floor, and then at my closed face, and I saw fear start to infiltrate her expression. "I am leaving, Caroline," I said, forcing my voice to come out cold and bored, channeling all my acting capacity for that final moment. "What do you mean leaving?" she asked, letting out a nervous laugh, thinking it was a joke. "We have dinner tonight. I reserved that restaurant you wanted." "There will be no dinner," I interrupted, crossing my arms and looking at her with the contempt I reserved for rude customers at the market. "The contract is over for me. I am tired of playing house, tired of these rules, of this whole act. I want my money, the part I am owed for the time I endured, and I want to leave now." Caroline recoiled as if I had slapped her, the color draining from her face. "Luna, what are you talking about? Last night, that wasn't an act. You said you loved me." I kept my face impassive, although inside I was screaming, begging to hug her. "Last night was fun," I admitted, shrugging with calculated indifference. "But don't confuse sex with love, Caroline. I am a poor woman. I needed to ensure you were happy enough not to cancel my payment." It was a strategy, and it worked well, didn't it? Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head in denial, refusing to believe in the monster I was pretending to be. "No, I don't believe you. I felt your heart beat. I saw how you took care of me when I was sick. That wasn't for the money. Please, Luna, if someone told you something, if my uncle—" "Don't blame anyone," I cut in, before she got too close to the truth. "The truth is I looked at my life and looked at yours, and realized I don't have the stomach to be the trophy wife of a woman who lives for work. I want the money to go back to my real life, where I don't need to pretend to be who I am not." She was silent for a long moment, tears streaming freely down her face, and I saw the light in her eyes go out, replaced by that ancient and terrible coldness I fought so hard to melt. Her posture changed, her shoulders hardened, and she raised her chin, putting on the armor again before my eyes. "So it was all a business deal," she said, her voice now as icy as mine, cutting like broken glass. "Since the beginning, you were just calculating the profits." "Exactly," I confirmed, feeling a taste of bile in my mouth. "Business is business, as you said yourself on the first day. Now, if you can make the transfer, I would appreciate it. I have a bus to catch." Caroline walked to the table where she had left her purse, took the checkbook with trembling hands, and filled out a slip with quick and violent movements. She tore the check and extended it to me, without looking me in the eyes. "Take it. It is the full value of the contract. Get out of my sight and never appear again." I took the paper, feeling it burn my fingers, and grabbed the handle of my suitcase. I didn't look back as I walked to the elevator, because I knew if I looked, if I saw the woman of my life destroyed in the middle of the room with a bouquet of lilies at her feet, I wouldn't be able to leave. The metal doors closed, cutting her image from my vision, and only then, in the silence of the cabin going down to the lobby, did I allow myself to collapse. I leaned my forehead on the cold mirror and cried silently, a convulsive and painful cry, knowing I had just saved her life at the cost of my own soul. I had defeated her uncle, but I had lost everything that mattered. 3 weeks dragged on since I left the penthouse, and time seemed to have gone back to running at the torturous speed of poverty, where every minute is spent calculating coins and every hour is a struggle for survival. I had returned to a back room in the outskirts, worse than the previous one, with a leak in the ceiling that wept dirty water every time it rained, creating mud puddles on the burnt cement floor. I got a job cleaning fish at a public market, and the smell of rotten sea air and guts impregnated my skin in such a way that even after 3 baths with coconut soap, I still felt the odor of my misery. My hands, which days before caressed sheets of Egyptian thread and Caroline's soft skin, were now red, cut, and smelling of raw fish. A physical punishment that seemed appropriate for the pain I carried in my chest. I didn't touch the check money. That piece of paper, which was worth more than my entire life, was forgotten inside a book on the shelf of the penthouse. Silent proof I hoped she would one day find. Following Caroline's life from a distance was a form of masochism I practiced religiously every day, stopping at the newsstand to read the headlines. "Caroline Alcantara assumes presidency of the development firm with unanimous approval," said the cover of the business magazine, stamping a photo of her impeccable in a white suit. She was beautiful, powerful, and untouchable, but I knew that look. It was the look of someone who had died inside and was functioning only by inertia and hate. Her smile in the photo didn't reach her eyes. It was just a red slit in a face of cold porcelain. I didn't know, while scrubbing the dirty floor of the market, that on the other side of the city, the penthouse had turned into a mausoleum even more silent than before. Caroline had fired the cook and the housekeeper, unable to bear any human presence that reminded her of the life we had for brief days. She wandered through the empty rooms at night, sleepless, haunted by the ghost of my presence, by the smell of my shampoo that still persisted on the pillow, fighting against the anger of having been used and the illogical pain of missing the woman who betrayed her. She tried to convince herself that I was just a gold digger, as her uncle always said, but her heart, that traitor, refused to accept the official version of the facts. The turning point happened on a gray Tuesday, when the paranoia of loneliness made Caroline review the security camera recordings of the apartment, perhaps looking for a reason to hate me more, or perhaps just wanting to see my image leaving through the door one last time. She watched the images of the day of my departure, advancing and rewinding the digital timeline. It was then that she saw. At 12:30, Hours before I left, the elevator opened and Uncle Arthur entered the apartment. She saw his arrogant posture, the brown folder in his hand, and the way he cornered me in the living room. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. He was the predator, and I was the prey. Caroline watched, frozen before the monitor, while her uncle threw the photos on the table, gestured threateningly, and then left with a triumphant smile. She saw the exact moment I fell to my knees on the rug after he left. My body doubled over in a desperate cry she had never witnessed. The truth hit her with the force of a runaway train, dismantling the entire narrative of betrayal she had built to protect herself. I hadn't left for the money. I hadn't left because I didn't love her. I had left because I was coerced, threatened, sacrificed on the altar of her family's ambition. She ran to the living room shelf, frantically searching through the books, knocking over expensive vases and ornaments on the floor, until she found the check. The paper was there, untouched, uncashed, kept as a bookmark in the book I read to her on rainy nights. Caroline held the check with trembling hands, and the scream that had been stuck in her throat for 3 weeks finally exploded, a guttural sound of pain and regret that echoed through the glass walls. She had believed the lie because it was easier to believe she didn't deserve love than to believe someone loved her enough to lose everything for her. In that moment, the president of the firm disappeared. The cold and calculating woman died. What remained was a desperate woman, consumed by guilt for not having protected the only person who tried to save her for real. She looked at the clock, at the rain starting to fall outside, and knew she couldn't lose another second. She didn't know where I was, didn't know if I would take her back after being kicked out like an animal, but knew that if she didn't find me, her life in that crystal palace would be worth absolutely nothing. Caroline grabbed the car keys, ignoring the phone ringing with some corporate urgency, and ran out the door, leaving behind the company, the legacy, and the pride, moved only by the terrifying urgency of love. The smell of raw fish and old sea air impregnated my clothes, my hair, and even my thoughts, creating a cloud of misery that followed me wherever I went. It was a rainy Thursday, and the public market had that chaotic late-afternoon movement, with shouts of vendors announcing deals and hurried customers dodging puddles of dirty water forming on the uneven floor. I was bent over the cold steel counter, scaling fish with repetitive and mechanical movements, my hands numb from contact with crushed ice, trying not to think that, less than a month ago, those same hands held crystal glasses and caressed the face of the woman I loved. With every scale that flew and stuck to my grimy rubber apron, I felt a piece of my soul go away, drained down the drain along with the bloody cleaning water. My boss, a rude man who shouted more than he spoke, ordered me to speed up the service because a big order had just arrived, and I just lowered my head, obeying without question, grateful in a distorted way to have a body too exhausted to allow the mind to wander to the penthouse. I had no news of Caroline for days, as I had stopped buying newspapers to save bus fare, but her image haunted me in every reflection, in every moment of silence. I looked at the clock on the peeling wall, counting the minutes to the end of the shift, not knowing that time was running in a very different way on the other side of the city, and that my reality was about to collide violently with the past. Suddenly, a subtle change in the market atmosphere caught my attention. The constant noise of conversations and negotiations diminished, replaced by a curious murmur that spread like a wave. I looked up, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my gloved hand, and saw my stall colleagues looking at the main entrance with expressions of shock and scorn. I followed their gaze, and my heart stopped, dropping to the pit of my stomach with a leaden weight. There, standing at the entrance of the fishmonger aisle, illuminated by the weak light of fluorescent lamps, was Caroline. She looked like a hallucinogenic vision, completely out of place in that setting of dirt and noise. She wore a white tailored suit that must have cost more than the entire stall where I worked, but the fabric was splashed with mud on the hem of the pants, and her high heels sank into the dirty water on the floor without her seeming to care. Her hair, always impeccably arranged, was loose and slightly messy from the humidity, and her chest rose and fell in a frantic rhythm, as if she had run a marathon to get there. Her eyes swept the place with manic desperation, ignoring the judgmental looks, searching for something vital, searching for me. Panic took me by assault. Her uncle had been clear. If I didn't disappear, he would destroy her life. Her presence there was a danger, a violation of the agreement that kept her reputation intact. I tried to shrink behind a stack of styrofoam boxes, praying to become invisible, feeling shame burn my face. I didn't want her to see me like this, dirty, smelling of fish, reduced to my social insignificance. I wanted to preserve the image of the Luna who wore velvet and silk, not this broken and humiliated version. But it was useless. Caroline's radar gaze crossed the aisle and locked on me, and I saw the exact moment recognition and relief flooded her face, followed by deep pain upon seeing my situation. "Luna," she shouted, her voice echoing over the buzz of the market, breaking any protocol of etiquette she cherished. She started running in my direction, pushing a wheelbarrow that was in the way, her steps splashing in the dirty water. I dropped the knife on the counter and retreated, raising my dirty hands like a shield. "Go away, Caroline," I shouted back, my voice choked by rising tears. "You can't be here. Your uncle will destroy you. Please go away." But she didn't stop. She went around the stall, invading my workspace, and completely ignored the dirt, the fish blood, and the strong smell. Before I could flee, she reached me and held my arms, not with disgust, but with a possessive and desperate strength. "I don't care about my uncle," she said, panting, eyes fixed on mine, shining with unshed tears. "I don't care about the company, the presidency, or what people will say. I saw the recordings, Luna. I saw what he did to you. I know you left to save me. I tried to break free, terrified by the idea that someone could be filming that her ruin was happening there, in real time. I am a nobody, Caroline," I sobbed, feeling hot tears wash my dirty face. "I stink of fish. I live in a hole. I am not fit for your world. Look at you. Look at your white suit. You are getting completely dirty." She looked at the fish blood stain I had left on the sleeve of her blazer when trying to push her away, and let out an incredulous and hysterical laugh. "To hell with the suit," she exclaimed, and in an unthinking and wonderful movement, she pulled me against her body, hugging me tightly, burying her face in my sweaty and dirty neck. I felt her body shake against mine, and heard the sob that escaped her throat. I spent 3 weeks in that clean and perfect apartment, feeling like I was suffocating to death, she whispered against my skin. "I prefer the smell of fish with you than the smell of lavender alone. I prefer to lose everything than to lose you again." The whole market had stopped to watch the scene. The rich madam hugging the poor fishmonger in the middle of the mud. But for the first time in her life, Caroline was not acting for an audience. She held my face with both hands, dirtying her delicate palms with scales and soot, and looked at me with an adoration that cleansed all the shame I felt. "Let's go home, Luna," she asked. And it wasn't an order. It was an invitation to life. The contract is over. Now it is real life. And in real life, I am not going anywhere without my wife. I looked into her eyes and saw that the Iron Lady had melted forever, and that the uncle's threat, however terrible, was not greater than the strength of that woman who had crossed the city and dived into the mud just to rescue me. I knelt metaphorically before her courage and felt my defenses crumble. I took off the dirty apron and threw it on the floor, a symbolic gesture of someone leaving purgatory. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling. "Let's go home." And as we walked out holding hands through the market aisle, under the astonished gazes of the vendors, I knew we had just won the most important race of all, the race against our own fear of being happy. If this story touched your heart, and you want to see more emotional romances like this, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any news. Thank you for following this journey with us.